Welcome all. Good evening. I'll call to order the March meeting of the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors. Thank you all for being with us tonight. We'll start with the electronic meeting notice.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Just a moment. Sorry.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency, this meeting of the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors is being held electronically, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 A.3, the Continuity of Government Ordinance, adopted by the Alexandria City Council on June 20, 2020 to undertake essential business. All members of the board and staff are participating from remote locations through a Zoom meeting. This meeting continues to be held electronically, unless a determination is made that it is safe enough to be held in person, at the Alexandria Transit Company Board Room, 3000 Business Center Drive, Alexandria, Virginia. Electronic access will be provided in either event. The meeting can be accessed via Zoom and Facebook, and recordings are posted on YouTube and the Dash website. Public comment will be accepted via Zoom. A Zoom registration link is available on the Dash website. Alternatively, requests for public comment can be made during the public comment period by utilizing the raise hand feature. This meeting is being recorded.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Chair Kaplan.
Here.
Vice Chair Kleist.
Here.
Linda Bailey. Brandy Collins.
Here.
Kendall Taylor.
Here.
Matt Harris.
Here.
Hillary Orr.
Here.
Ajayesha Thomas.
Present.
Okay. Chair Kaplan, you have a quorum, and the following members are currently absent. Linda Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Linda asked for an excused absence tonight, so she will not be with us. Our first order of business is a hearing on the Title VI to hear from members of the public before we adopt those policies. Mr. Baker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, we will have Spanish and Amharic translators available if anyone needs assistance providing feedback on our proposed Title VI policies. I'll pause now briefly so that our translators can each individually provide that information to our attendees.
Buenas noches. Si necesita asistencia de traducción en español para comentar sobre las políticas del título 6 propuestas por Dash, déjennos saber ahora, haciendo clic en la función de levantar la mano en su pantalla.
እንደምን ዋላችሁ እንዲሁም እንዴት አመሻችሁ። ዛሬ በቦርድ ፊት ቀርቦ የምንወያይበትን ታይትል 6 መመሪያ በተመለከተ የተለየ ወይም ማጠናከሪያ ሐሳብ ያላችሁ የከተማችን ነዋሪዎች እንዲሁም የህዝብ ትራንስፖርት ተጠቃሚዎች በአማርኛ ቋንቋ ተናጋሪዎች የራሳችሁ ቋንቋ በሚገባችሁ መልኩ ያላችሁን አስተያየት ወይም ማጠናከሪያ ሐሳብ ቢኖራችሁ ለማሳወቅ ከፈለጋችሁ በኮምፒውተሩ ፊት ለፊት በሚገኘው የእጅ ምልክት በመጫን እንድታሳውቁን እንጠይቃለን።
Mr. Chair, that concludes the announcements, and just a reminder that we will accept raised hand participation if there are any individuals who wish to do so. So I'll let you conduct the hearing.
Okay. So this hearing, we will have a separate public comment period for our routine public inquiries. We will now hear speakers solely on the Title VI policies that are under consideration for adoption tonight. There was information in the packet about the policies which have been presented to us before, and then Martin had summarized some of the outreach and the comments that were submitted by members of the community for our consideration, how staff had reacted to those. Do we go directly to speakers, or does staff have anything they wish to say at this point regarding the hearing?
I believe you can go straight to speakers.
All right. Well, we have our hourglass up on the Zoom. 3 minutes is allowed per speaker, and some additional guidelines are present as well. We will recognize anybody first who has pre-registered, and then we will pause to have staff ascertain whether there are any raised hands and if there's anybody else who wishes to be heard. So staff, I'll let you go ahead and call the first speakers.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We did not have any pre-registered public comments for this section. So if there is anyone who would like to provide comment, please raise your hand at this time.
All right, we'll pause to provide a moment for that.
It looks like Bob Gronenberg does have his hand raised and would like to provide comment. If we could please allow him to speak. Thank you.
All right, Bob, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about the dash route classification chart in the material, that some routes are classified as minority and some as non-minority. For example, Route 103 is non-minority and it passes through some of the most affluent parts of the city along Russell Road, but it also serves Alexandria, where many minority people live. Line 31 is non-minority, but it also serves Southern Towers. Line 30 is called minority. Line 102 is called minority, and it serves Janney's Lane, where quite a few affluent people reside. So I just don't understand what looks like an arbitrary slice and dice of the bus routes into minority and non-minority. And that will mean that people who live along a route that is considered a non-minority route will not enjoy the same protection as those who live on a minority route. So I appreciate a clarification on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Mr. Chair, I couldn't quite hear you, but I can provide a brief response. But thank you for the question. It's a very good question that we did get as well during one of our public meetings. The answer is that the FTA provides a strict definition for what is classified as a minority route and a non-minority route. And that definition is that any route that has more than 1/3 of its revenue miles in an area that is classified as a minority, an area that has a heavier or higher percentage of minorities than the service area as a whole. So based on, we worked with some city GIS staff to assess each of our routes, and these were the results that we came up. So that's how we arrived at those classifications.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Any further speakers? All right, if not, I will, well, do we need a motion to close the public hearing?
I believe you can just do that yourself, Mr. Chair.
All right, public hearing closed. All right, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, staff. We'll be discussing the Title VI later in the meeting. We will now ask whether there are any, we'll have our regular public comment period, and so we'll ask if there are any speakers who wish to be heard on any other dash issues. And so I will put our hourglass back up, and which also has the rules of speaking, and also the customer service address, which is the email address, which is the easiest way, particularly for issues about service or experience on a dash bus. The folks at our customer service are able to troubleshoot those issues and get a resolution. So encourage folks to use that, especially during the month between our meetings. Do we have any speakers to register with?
Yeah, but I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, can anyone hear me?
No, well, you're mumbling.
Oh,
We hear you now.
well, I pulled the computer closer to me. I have this headset that I didn't, that Beth was kind enough to give me, that I didn't set up before the meeting because I thought I would have my setup a little better tonight, but I may fiddle with it when we have an agenda item where I don't need to be speaking. I apologize for that, but I'll try to get the headset plugged in.
Yeah, you sound better when it's closer to you. So
yeah, I'm basically, I don't know how I look on camera. I have the laptop almost like right up to my face. So,
you look fine.
Yeah, you look fine.
Okay, apologies. Thank you, Jaisha, for letting me know. So I was just encouraging folks with public comment. We'll hear from speakers, but noting the dash email address that's there so our customer service staff can troubleshoot any issues, particularly about service related or any issues that come up on a particular bus about the experience. We've got qualified staff that are able to deal with those and troubleshoot those quite easily. Do we have anybody pre-registered?
Mr. Chair, we also did not have any pre-registration for public comment for this period either.
Okay, so we'll pause and ask whether there are any speakers to use the raise hand feature, and Whitney, you can let me know in about 15 seconds whether we have anyone.
Mr. Chair, it does not look like any of our participants this evening have raised their hand to provide public comment.
All right, thanks, Whitney. We'll go ahead and close public comment. Next order of business is approval of the minutes from our February 9th meeting, which were included in the meeting packet. Are there any revisions or corrections to the minutes as they were presented? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt them.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the minutes from our February meeting.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second? Is that Jaysha? Seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Moving into the chair's report, I have, again, I'm looking at a picture of me. I have one item to discuss, which is the potential resumption of in-person meetings. So a few weeks ago, the CDC changed some of the COVID, the guidelines in terms of how COVID cases are reported and how a community's risk is assessed. And so Alexandria, under these new guidelines, appears in the low criteria for risk, although the city is still under a state of emergency that I believe expires at the end of June. And it is that state of emergency that has allowed us, when we make a determination that it's unsafe for us to gather in person, to continue to have meetings like we are tonight. I think given that we are now in a low risk profile, and knowing that the state of emergency is going to expire in a few months, that we need to begin thinking about what is necessary for us to gather again in person and transact our business, recognizing that probably half our board at this point has never met with us in person around a table, and this is the only way of kind of conducting our business that you know. Josh and I have been in conversation, and he has shared with me that the Dash facility is now fully reopened. I had closed briefly during the Omicron variant, and that they have held staff meetings successfully through much of COVID, and so the boardroom there is certainly available to us, and the staff is also very adept at using the technology to facilitate hybrid meetings for folks who would be participating remotely, either our board members subject to the electronic meeting policy we passed in the fall, or members of the public who could also participate remotely. So what I have said I want to do in this is to kind of look at where the Transportation Commission is and other transportation related boards in the city. And Josh had checked with TNES and had said the Transportation Commission was sort of where we are, kind of assessing their options. And at least when we had last spoken, had not made a decision on the resumption of in-person meetings. And since they also have their meeting place at City Hall, which is where I ultimately want to get back to meeting at a place that is fully accessible for our individuals, members of the public who ride transit to get to our meetings. Whereas that is the one downside to the Dash facility, is that it has some challenges just in terms of crossing Duke Street, even eastbound, which stops are served at the time of our meeting, because there are some restrictions during rush hour as to where the buses stop, and also the walk from the bus stops is not fully accessible. There are breaks in terms of sidewalks, and so understanding kind of how we can get to transitionally meeting at the Dash facility and then either meeting at City Hall or another facility that is very, very accessible via transit. We've talked about some of this before, but I would just encourage you, if you have concerns, you have questions kind of about how we might do this, or suggestions as to how we can make this a good transition for everybody, to please, contact Josh or contact me offline so we can have those conversations. But I would suspect by April, we'll have more guidance from the city about, their expectation in terms of resuming meetings, maybe some more about some of the technology that we'll be leveraged in order to have hybrid meetings and spaces outside the council chambers. And we'll be able to kind of make a better decision about when to resume that. I also want to be respectful and understanding of your time and understand that, we have all built up routines over the last 2 years as to how we do this. And we've gotten very used to doing things this way, and that, changing our schedules to make sure that we can be at a given location at a certain time is going to require some adjustment as well. And I want to make sure that folks have time to kind of negotiate that as we go along. So I just wanted to kind of tee that up, and certainly look forward to and welcome speaking with any of you about how we can make this work well. Josh, is there anything you want to add to that from our conversation?
No, Mr. Chair, I think you put it well. We'll continue to monitor the other groups and give you feedback as to what they are doing. But the conditions are, as I last understood them, it's if the state of emergency still exists and the board determines it is unsafe to meet in person, then you can continue to do that. We just need to restate that to the city attorney's office. Excuse me, city attorney's office for each meeting. And we'll continue to do that until further notice.
Right. Thank you. And I'll just have one other commission report that I'll just share here. As I mentioned, I co-chair the Transportation Committee for the Commission on Aging. That committee, when we last met, approved a letter to City Council that is going to be voted on by the full commission tomorrow. That letter asks for additional funds for staff positions in the complete streets and Vision Zero functions of the city. And one of the justifications for that is the commission is concerned about access to transit and knows that additional staff resources there will help to move along more of those projects. So I'm hopeful the full commission will support that request unanimously, and we can submit that letter. I know that the mayor and Councilman McPike have already asked budget questions related to those functions. And whether the optimal staffing level and what projects could be prioritized in Vision Zero actions could be completed if that goes through. So I was very encouraged to see that, and I wanted to share that with this board because I know that we in the past have prioritized funding for those positions as a priority, and it certainly helps our riders to be able to make it to bus stops. Hillary, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for your report.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, Hillary, to jump in. When would you like us to slot?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to do, Hillary, is it all right if I have Lonnie go now? I'm sorry, I meant to recognize him before my report.
Of course.
Thank you. Lonnie, thank you for waiting, and thank you, Hillary, for letting me put Lonnie ahead. So Lonnie's going to present on the MOU for the that we in the city will be signing with the Federal Transit Administration.
I'm just going to get this slide up here for you. I had to switch to another slide. All right, there you go, Lonnie. You should be good to go. I'm certainly happy to help as well.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the meeting. I did not know that I was making a presentation. I thought I was answering questions. So I don't really have a presentation prepared. So Josh, if you want to walk through some of the general information.
Sure.
And then I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lonnie. You're right. You're somewhat a subject matter expert on agreements, but we'll both tackle this together. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is just a reminder. This is an MOU, in this case termed an interlocal agreement, which was included in your board packet and previously sent out to you in advance for review. The purpose of this agreement is essentially to define the roles and responsibilities between DASH and city staff and in the management and administration of being the grant recipient. There are a number of requirements that the Federal Transit Administration has for recipients. The city team working with DASH and a consultant determined that this should be titled an interlocal agreement. As seen here on the screen, I did receive a copy of this, a draft, transmitted it to Lonnie, who reviewed. Additionally, my staff provided some comment. Lonnie provided his. was included in the responses in the final draft agreement was presented. And so prior to your consideration, I'll let Lonnie just comment on anything that maybe was outstanding. And certainly then, Mr. Chair, you can, any questions from board members for between Lonnie and I will be happy to answer.
Well, I guess I can just generally say that there are several ways that the federal government can transmit these monies to local projects, and I think one possibility was having DASH be a subrecipient for the city. In effect, DASH would be in charge of all of it. It would be in charge of all the financial, writing the checks and all the finances and all of that, as well as managing the project. The other way to do it is to have the city be the recipient and use DASH as a third-party provider. And I think, as I understand the rationale from the city's point of view of choosing the latter option, is basically because right now all the finances are run through the city. And the city, I mean, even though DASH is an independent agency, the city is its finance manager. And it just seemed to make better sense to have the city be in charge of the finances and charge of the money. And what this interlocal agreement is sort of setting out who's going to do what once the funds are received from the federal government. I mean, I don't think there's not a whole lot of detail. It's mostly a statement of cooperation and some outlining of who's got the lead. If you look at the last part, I think it's Exhibit 2 or Exhibit B at the end of the document, Appendix 2. It sets out who has the lead on certain areas and who has a supporting role. And the city mostly has the lead. I do think one of the things that Josh and I talked about that was important was that we clarify who's going to have title to the assets at the end of the day. And I think it's been cleared up. It's pretty clear in the document that DASH will have the title to the assets, not the city. I mean, I understand that y'all have the title to all your buses and your equipment and stuff now. And so that's consistent with that. I guess another issue that was raised, somebody raised a question about, there's a provision in here about arbitration in the event that there's a dispute between the city and DASH. And somebody raised a question, well, can you have that between a parent and a subsidiary? And it's extremely unlikely. I can't imagine how that situation would occur, because if the city got into a snit with DASH, they would simply take charge. They would have a board meeting and they would figure out how to get rid of the board and get done what they wanted to do. But so I can't imagine that any dispute would ever be resolved by arbitration or litigation or any other third-party decision-making process. But I don't think it hurts anything to have it in there. And so we ended up leaving it in there. If anybody has any specific questions, I'd be happy to look at it.
Lonnie, I would just offer Hillary might have some comment. I don't know. She's been working on this process jointly with us. I know that she and I talk quite often. I just want to express to the board there's a lot of collaboration in regards to pursuing these grants. And I think one of the concerns early on, I think by both parties, frankly, was the amount of federal oversight and the implications of that throughout the city and throughout DASH. And I feel pretty good that this helps to define where those responsibilities fall. It's going to require quite an extensive amount of policy and procedural work just to make sure we're checking all the boxes. But one of the things that I really appreciate about this approach is that we get to leverage the city's infrastructure, which is already very familiar with and does a lot of grants. Now, that's not to say the city doesn't need help with this, and so I want to be, aware of that and be a good partner in taking on as much as we possibly can at Dash within the legal limits to do so, to help make sure that it doesn't, muddy all the water, so to say. So that would just be my commentary on it.
Yep. Thanks, Josh. I would just add, this is really important for the city, and with all the federal money that has come out, I think having the city be the direct recipient also enables us to apply for non-Dash related federal transit funds for some of the things that the city is working on right now. So the structure seems to work well for both of us, and Josh is right. There is an additional work that comes along with this, and the city manager did propose in his budget Tess put in for one FTE for grant administration to support basically federalization, but also a lot of the other grant work that we do, and that was proposed in the FY23 budget.
David, I see your headset, but you're still muted.
Let me recognize Steve first, then I'll go ahead. I've taken the headset off temporarily.
Thank you, David. Josh, I saw in the document that Dash will now be subject to drug and alcohol testing under the FTA's requirements. Is there a mechanism in place that we could take advantage of any services the city may offer, since the city has individuals that have a CDL and would also be subject to drug and alcohol testing under FTA requirements, or under, federal motor carrier requirements?
So we currently operate under FMCSA guidelines for drug and alcohol testing. We would shift under the FTA authority, which would not apply to any other city employees in this situation. So we currently manage our drug and alcohol program in-house, and that's proposed to stay that way. We would have a policy change effective July 1, anticipated associated with this, that would basically shift us to make sure that our program and language follow that of the FTA. But we have been gradually, building up our program over the years. And you all know Stephanie, have met her. She is now responsible for that program and has done a wonderful job, making sure that it is compliant. So I have no concerns about the administration or management of that program going into it. And to answer your question about leveraging this with other city departments, again, I'm not aware of any other city department that would be impacted or operating an FTA asset at this time. I think probably what the city would be doing would be more infrastructure investments related to transit under FTA authority.
Yeah, okay. No, I just wanted to make sure that the plan that we had currently, that it will meet the FTA's requirements that are in place.
Yeah, so yeah, Stephanie has one ready to go. We're not operating under it right now, but correct, we would move to that.
Okay, so essentially a cost neutral issue?
Right.
Oh, okay. And the other question I had, and I didn't see it in the document, but I suspect that Stephanie got involved in this. Just wanted to verify that we weren't going to be subject to the safety plan requirements under Part 673 that FTA has, being a recipient of FTA funds.
We would, and that's something else that's also in Stephanie's court.
Okay.
So we do have the safety plan process in the works right now. Is, as you probably know, very, very intense.
Yeah, it can be rather onerous, which is why I wanted to make sure, because I didn't see it as being identified as how we were going to handle it, but I could see staffing implications along, not just for, I'll say, the direct observation and the implementation of the program, but also the back office operations that's required under Part 673.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that's a concern we
Okay.
have. We've been working internally to make sure we're planning for that appropriately. I think we feel pretty confident in where we are, but I appreciate the recognition of the impact of that program. I think that there will be opportunity to collaborate with the city staff member who's responsible for the grants programs as well on things like this. And we also have access to consultants to help us get that in place. So a couple of different factors we're looking at, but that has definitely been one that's been big on the list. And also Stephanie is quite aware of and familiar with from previous work as well.
Okay, good. All right, well, thank you I appreciate the response.
Uh-oh, we can't hear you again, David. There, try again. Now, yeah, you got to get close. There you go.
Okay. I'm going to try the headset again after we after I finish speaking. I want to thank everybody who was involved in putting this together. I think this was a great collaboration, and I know that Dash had some hesitancy at the beginning of this process about how this would be handled and responsibilities shared between the two entities, but it sounds like we've gotten to a good place, and that I'm glad to hear also that the additional staff resources on the city side was included in the budget too, because that's so important to make sure that this agreement is administered properly, and that there may be other opportunities for the city to leverage additional grant money that they didn't have access to before. So really job well done. And I just have one comment I need to make, which is it's not directly related to the policy, but it is to this program. I think I've said it before, but I do need to just kind of put this out on the record. I'm a federal employee who works for an executive branch agency, and there is a criminal statute that prohibits employees of executive branch agencies in the government from representing an entity before the federal government. So while there's nothing in this policy that deals specifically with the board, other than the board must approve the policy, and I can vote on this, I can't meet with anybody from FTA. I can't ever sign a letter that goes to FTA. So we just, in our own policies and procedures, as long as I remain the chair of this board, we need to ensure that we have, and I think Mr. Price may be in the same position that I am, we just need to make sure that whether we designate Hillary as the vice president of ATC, as the board member who would sign correspondence going to them, I just want to put that out on the record because it's very important to me that we ensure that that's followed. Are there other comments from the board about the policy? If not, do you want us to vote on this now?
Please. We'll go to City Council next.
All right. Is there a motion to adopt the policy?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I move to approve and adopt the interlocal agreement to be submitted to council for approval.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Steve. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you. Hillary will go on with your report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see everyone tonight. I have a few updates for you all, and one that is a new arrival, so it was not in your board packet, and I'll talk about that at the end. But just to start off, it is grant season for us. And so I'll try and keep you all updated on some of the transportation related grants that the city is applying for this spring. We're getting ready to apply for. The grant process is very long. But our the first one I wanted to mention tonight is the Smart Scale project. So this is one of our larger grants. We apply for a Smart Scale every 2 years. And this is a state grant for large capital projects. The 3 projects that the city is submitting, we have work that we need to do on the exit ramp coming to Duke Street for vehicles to come off 395 and more safely access the new West Alexandria, the Landmark Mall site. Can't remember which way we named it. And the Inova Hospital. So the city, as part of that agreement, agreed to make modifications to that ramp by the time that the site is open. So we have design funding and we're looking for construction funding to finish that project. We are also in the same area looking for funding for around Duke Street and Van Dorn Street. These would be for intersection improvements, and they'd be along Duke and Van Dorn near the Landmark Mall site. Right now, there are a lot of slip ramps coming in to and off of these roadways. And so Duke Street is also one of our high crash corridors in our Vision Zero plan. And so the goal is to make this area more safe and more walkable. As we know, there will be more pedestrians, transit riders, people biking, scooting, coming through this area in Duke Street. And so we want to get funding to upgrade those intersections, make them safer, and provide some sidewalks where they're missing as well. And then lastly, we are looking to apply for funds to construct the Metroway extension. So this is north of Glebe Road, and it will go to Evans Lane, and then the Metroway will cut through the new Potomac Yard Metro site, and North Potomac Yard site over to the new Metro, and then up into Arlington. So we're looking for funding to construct that portion of the current Metroway. The next grant that we are applying for, this is one of the grants that was announced with the bipartisan infrastructure law, is the RAISE grant. This is formerly the Tiger grant. We'd received funding for Potomac Yard Metro with this grant before. We are looking for about up to $6 million for improvements at the King Street and North Beauregard Street intersection. This is a project that's been on the books for a very long time. We've had to phase it due to funding constraints. And it was originally about kind of widening the intersection, providing more turn lanes, but now we've seen a lot of development in the area. And so we took a second look at this intersection before, kind of using the old plans that were drafted many years ago, and to really see if that was the right design. Now with new development, we will have a West End Transitway transit stop here. So a lot more people using the site in a different way. And so we have redesigned the intersection to include pedestrian refuge islands, hopefully greening some of those medians, tightening up some of the turn lanes and curb ramps. And we do need additional funding for this project. Regardless of the kind of more recent redesign, we needed additional funding to get us through with construction, because it is an older project and costs have gone up a lot. So hopefully this project will score well, because it is so shovel ready, and because we do have a large local match for it. But that is one that we will be submitting at the beginning of April. Let's see. Next, we have the Duke Street Transitway Ad Hoc Advisory Group. This actually went to council last night. We had a great discussion with City Council about this advisory group, and they did move forward with allowing the city manager to appoint the at-large members, but they did change the makeup of the group slightly. There are now 4 at-large community representatives, and there is a designated business representative from a small business along the corridor, and a development community representative. So the city manager will be in charge of appointing those 5 positions. The application will go out very soon. There's also room on this committee for someone from the Dash Bus Riders Group, or a designee, if they have a designee, somebody that might not be a member, but that they feel is a good representative and perhaps lives along the corridor. So we're really excited about this group. It's now 11 members. And we hope to kick off the first meeting in April. So we're going to try and get the application out as soon as we can and make sure that we are getting our at-large community representatives from impacted neighborhoods. But we're also looking to get people such as students, renters, minority communities, and non-driving households. One other change that council made, they wanted more at-large community representatives from impacted communities, 2 of whom were west of Quaker Lane, and then one of the at-large members was to be a resident of one of the apartment complexes along Duke Street. So that helps to ensure that we will get renters voiced on the committee. So the committee it'll last for about a year. There's a possibility of an extension, but we are really hoping to work through the concept designs for the corridor and get something to council about a year from now. So spring 2023 with a preferred alternative. On the King Street Metro Station project, this is very short because the project is almost finished. They're going through final punch list items this month and hopefully closing out that project very soon. That's exciting. We've been working on this for quite a long time. Longer than I've been with the city. So it's an exciting one to finally complete. And then lastly, I did want to mention an item. You might have seen the news release from WMATA, although I will say that they buried the lead a little bit. A press release did come out from WMATA about some construction work that they're going to be doing. So there's 2 key things that are really important for Alexandria. So the first is that they will be doing track work necessary to open the Potomac Yard Metro Station, and starting in September, and that's going to be about 6 weeks. And so both the blue and yellow line will have to be shut down for that track work starting in September 2022 for 6 weeks. The other more alarming information that was provided to us was that the work that they need to do on the yellow line tunnel and bridge, which we were told last year would be about 3 to 4 months of work, is going to be also start in September, and that will then go through spring 2023. And the yellow line will be shut down between the Pentagon and Lafont Plaza. So this is going to be a real challenge for transit riders coming from Alexandria. It's something that council is already talking about. The mayor's already asked to do a letter, and council's already requested that WMATA come to a meeting this spring to present to them. We're already talking to them about the mitigation plan and what that looks like. Staff will work very closely with WMATA as we figure out how to handle this and what our mitigation is going to be. But that news release just came out yesterday. So not great news from WMATA, not surprising, but that is where we stand right now. So I'm happy to take questions from you all about any of those topics or anything else you might have questions about.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I changed the port that I have plugged in. First on the Duke Street project, I want to really just take a moment and celebrate, I think, the makeup of that advisory group. You guys did a very good job, and council's changes of getting a really good cross section of the community to sit on that group that I hope will have a good outcome. And I think I've lived here almost 18 years, and this is the first time I can remember any transportation related project where we specifically appointed someone who is a writer of a transit system. We've sometimes appointed people in neighborhoods where we've said, oh, it'd be good if they have experience riding a bus, but this is the first time we've ever had a slot. And that's because, Josh and his staff stood up a rider advisory committee that is meeting and is, really starting to contribute. And I think it's great to see that one of them is going to be included on that group. So kudos. On just, the metro state, yeah, I saw the news yesterday. I think a lot of us did it. It was sobering to hear, especially as we kind of consider WMATA's mixed messaging about trying to rebuild their ridership at the same time, which I think is really kind of an impossible goal for them at present. But the way we handled the 2019 shutdown and the many different alternatives and the thoughtfulness of that, at least among our local officials, really gives me some hope that we will get through this project, although it's a much longer scope and it's covering winter months where at least the bridge shutdown where options like biking are going to be less attractive. But is there a role for Dash in this project? Maybe it's too early to say. And when would be an appropriate time for us to get a briefing on potential mitigation strategies?
So what we've heard from WMATA is that they likely won't have anything out until June. Because we had requested that they come to council in May, and they said we can certainly do that, but they don't know if they'll have their full final plan yet. They'll probably have something draft in May. So, this just came out. We're certainly talking to them. I think there's definitely a potential for Dash to have a role in it. Dash will be at the table with us, just like they were with the metro shutdown. And we will certainly keep you posted each month and figure out the right time to either have WMATA come and attend one of our meetings, or however you would like to handle it, but we'll certainly keep you posted. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess June would probably be the main, since we recess over the summer, would be when we would have to do that update. And I'm sure staff is asking for this, but can we promise that we won't have to take a shuttle to the airport, get on a train to the Pentagon, and then get on another shuttle to go into DC? Because that's my nightmare scenario. And that they're still running the trains every 20 minutes. That's well, I don't know if you can comment on that yet, but that was what I immediately thought.
Sure hope not.
That was what I immediately thought of, because that would, if we can have a direct, so it's a one-seat ride on a bus, and understand there'll have to be options for folks who are going to those intermediate stations too. But gosh, it's going to be challenging. But thank you for I know there's a lot of thoughtful discussion going on behind the scenes on this. Thanks for what you were able to share tonight. Any other questions for Hillary? Okay. Well, I did just want to. Oh, we're going to do the nominating committee report before we have reports from others. So, Steve, thank you for serving on the nominating committee along with Hillary and Ajayesha, and I'll recognize you for your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too did not expect to see my image broadcast to the world here, but we at the February meeting. Chair Kaplan established a nominating committee to develop a slate of officers for election for official positions. The committee was comprised of Hillary Orr as the city staff member, and Ajayesha Thomas and I were the board members as part of the nominating committee. The committee met and has developed the slate of candidates as you see before you. The committee is prepared to answer any questions you might have regarding our selections. If not, Mr. Chairman, I turn it over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you for your work, Steve, and committee. So the slate is before us. We would need a motion to adopt the slate. So I'll ask if there's someone wants to put forward a motion for approval.
I move to adopt the slate as presented.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Steve. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the slate is adopted, and thank you all for your confidence and wanting to have one more year with me at the helm. I look forward to working with all of you in the year to come, and thank you all of you for your service. And Steve, I appreciate having you again as vice chair.
Thank you, David. And again, thank you to my fellow board members for supporting my position as vice chair.
So we always ask if there are other boards and commissions that you serve on or associations that you'd like to share anything transportation related. So I'll ask the board if anyone has any announcements.
Mr. Chair, I can provide a briefing to the board members on the progress of the board recruitment subcommittee at this point.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I was going to ask if you all had a report.
Yes, the subcommittee met. Also comprised of Hillary Orr, Ajayesha Thomas, and myself, along with staff support from Dash. We had our first meeting and the advertisement for the position started on March the 1st. The period of advertisement, we elected for approximately 2 weeks and it will close on Friday, the 18th. And we expect to have the interviews completed in time for presentation to the board at the April 13th meeting. So while it's an ambitious schedule, we hope to be able to work through that process and be prepared to present our findings to the board on the 13th so that it could be brought forward to the city council in May for action. And this way the board member will be on board hopefully for the June meeting.
Well, thank you. That's great. I appreciate the committee doing that so expeditiously. And last month we talked about the Transportation Commission vacancy. We did not get a volunteer among our current board members to serve on the commission. So our hope will be that once the new member is transitioned into this role that and comfortable that they will be willing to serve on that commission concurrently.
Yes, we'll ensure that the candidates are aware that one of the responsibilities of this particular position will be that of serving as the DASH representative on the Transportation Commission.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any reports they want to provide or announcements? All right, if not, we'll move into the general manager reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. It's good to see you all. I have a number of updates in probably a little bit of length here, so bear with me. The first item, though, is there's not a slide for this, but there is a response to a customer service inquiry, which is included in your board packet. Feel free to review that, and if you have any questions, happy to answer those. But the first slide I have here is an informational item. On November 16th, that's a typo, 2021. Not 2022-21. This is an intense board packet. There's a lot of slides. Apologies. Anyway, I met with the committee. This is the first time I was asked to present to them. And it was a good conversation, an opportunity to talk about the priorities of DASH and what we're dealing with. I will say that the takeaway that there was a memo issued and it is included with the board packet as transmitted. Fundamentally, the committee recognized and expressed concern about the sustainability of fare free service and wanted to make sure that was highlighted. I think that was one of the key takeaways that I had in the conversation. So they have provided a memorandum to City Council, which was included for your reference and information in the packet. We appreciate their time thinking about DASH, taking a position and perspective and talking with us about the fiscal matters of the organization. The next item, since the last time we met, the city manager has released his preliminary budget publicly, and that process is quickly moving along. I know the city staff, probably Kendall and others, are already exhausted and we're just getting started. But needless to say, it is an important time of the year. And this is a time of the year when I report back to you on sort of where things have landed in the draft budget perspective to what I presented to you back in October and November, believe it or not. There were two meetings where we talked about the budget, the first of which was to discuss current services, which is effectively to provide the services we provide today. It's pretty self-explanatory there. And the second in November was our supplemental and reductions in accordance with the requests of, at that time, City Manager Mark Jenks. So that information was submitted. The staff teams on the city side have been working hard on this, and I think have put together a very strong and favorable budget for the city, and I'm really appreciative of their work. They've worked with us, the team at DASH, to get some understanding of the needs that we have and what we're trying to work on. I wanted to recap, though, before I provide this crosswalk perspective of what the position was that the board took when the budget was submitted. That was these three items here, with the priority being essentially no cuts. And this has been a longstanding position of the board and staff, that we should avoid reductions or cuts wherever possible, prior to exploring supplementals and additional funding. Secondly, we prioritize maintaining the fare free service structure. And third, pursuing the continued implementation of the new Dash network in accordance with the Alexandria Transit Vision Plan. So those are some of the priorities. As we talk through here, what I just want to kind of frame a little perspective for the board, what I'm looking for, and I'll have a slide that kind of outlines this, is it's important in this conversation that the board provide your position on what the priorities are and should continue to be relative to the budget, and what the next steps are that the board would like to see, if any, relative to responding to the city manager's budget, and going into the public outreach process, and the process where city council considers other matters. So what I have here on the screen is an attempt to illustrate a crosswalk. And I am not a pro at this like Edward and Kendall and others are. I will tell you, I spent quite a bit of time making sure I was able to articulate the numbers in an understandable way. So bear with me as I step through this a little bit. The table here shows the request from Dash, the second column recognizing what the funding was in my proposed budget, which the board considered in October, the funding request, essentially. The third column representing what came through in the city manager's budget as proposed, and then any differences. So the first line you'll see here, we are approximately $25.4 million request to the city for regular Dash services, and a little over $1 million request for the trolley. Then as you follow across here, you'll see that the funding in the city manager's budget is actually slightly above the current services request, and I'll explain that variance in just a moment, with a difference of $310,963 to the good. You'll also notice that the third line down there, which represents really one of our only controllable revenue sources, controllable, I will say, in quotes, no revenue is truly controllable, especially when it relies on a market like advertising, does reflect an increase which staff proposed based on budget numbers. So in the end, you can see that we effectively are funded a supplemental request of $397,363. My original budget did not account for TRIP, which is a new grant revenue source in this budget. And that total amount for fiscal 23 is a little over 2.8 million. So that was an important accomplishment, and one that the city worked hard on with Dash staff, and really the city staff submitted this grant. And you know, the mayor was a big champion of TRIP, and we're really appreciative of all of the work that went into that and the successful award of funding. I'm breaking down the supplementals on this slide relative to the supplementals that the dashboard discussed at the November meeting, and they're in order that they were originally discussed in priority. The first item being a supplemental, excuse me while I choke because my allergies have already started. I don't know if any of you are allergy sufferers, but they have already started. We had an additional staffing supplemental request, followed by a service reliability supplemental request, which was for stage buses to be inserted into the service to address missed trips and traffic and various other factors. The third was our ATV improvements as called for the new Dash network. And the fourth being the Duke Street improvements to the route that services Duke Street, or the routes that service Duke Street. I want to remind the board that we all talked about this, and we recognize that these are big asks, especially at a time when the Dash current services budget is a significant increase. So the fact that the city was such a great partner and helped to make sure that our current services was funding, I think is a really important and incredible accomplishment that I want to express appreciation for. So we recognize that we probably couldn't get all of these or some of these or many of these, depending on who you talk to, but we know that they're important and we know that there are things we want to keep on the table. What you see here in my chart is applying 310,963 of that supplemental to of the additional funding essentially shown in the previous chart to supplemental number 1. Now it is designated as such. In fact, the total amount referenced in the city manager's budget specifies 350,000 of this increase for supplemental number 1, and it outlines it as I'm skipping around slides here. It outlines it as additional positions for training, operations, maintenance, and information technology. And I'll come back to this slide in a moment. On the reduction side, you'll notice that there is a reduction taken in the city manager's proposed budget, and that is to the tune of 54,352. This is a different reduction from the 510,000 that was provided to the board. And the reason for that is that the board approved the goal reduction amount of 2.5%. And the number that we needed to hit was 510,000. So when we did our supplementals and reductions, we provided reductions that would meet that number. And during the subsequent months where staff were working on the budget in the city, as the numbers started to true up a little bit, it became clear what were the particular goals here. What did we really need to come up with? And we laid it on this number, the 54,000, which is an administrative, I'm calling it administrative reduction. It is a trimming of some non-operator training, some employee recognition programs, and most notably efforts to be a little more efficient in our facility and trim some of our utility costs, particularly as we have a capital project to replace a number of overhead doors in our maintenance shop area, and that is an extensive area to heat in the winter and consumes an awful lot of energy. So if we can gain efficiencies from those and change our policies as far as the use of those, we anticipate the opportunity to save some costs and reduce the heating losses in the building. So that's essentially an efficiency. So this is sort of a summary of where we are in the current presentation. The current services ask, as we outlined, is fully funded and it avoids any cuts to services. So to be clear, as it's presented today, Dash would operate everything we operate today, the same as we operate today, and have no reduction to any routes. There would be no customer-facing impacts whatsoever. There is additionally a supplemental provided, as stated in the city manager's narrative, of 350,000 towards increased staffing. Out of the original request, it's calculated that this will net about 4 FTEs focused in training, operations, maintenance, and IT. We did request 2 additional safety positions, as well as a training and a maintenance position, which would not be funded in this amount. I want to draw attention to, it's a small number, but I want to clarify for the board, in the interest of transparency and understanding kind of where we are, that our advertising program is new. This is the first year we've had it going, and we started it in the middle of COVID. And frankly, it's not doing well. We are now projecting, and I know Edward has lost a lot of sleep in these projections and trying to help us get a picture of where we're going. But we're now trimming our projection for our year end to a minimum, to the minimum amount contractually required of $100,000 in revenue. Originally, we had 250,000 projected. We hope to see advertising recover. We're optimistic that that will happen, but to be frank, it is not moving along at a pace that we would like to see it happening. So we did provide an opportunity to increase revenue there. The city did take that, and certainly can be ambitious and attempt to hit that. I just want to make sure that we all understand that that does reflect that program increasing by 60% over what we're actually getting in the current year. So there's some risk there, and that's just really what I wanted to highlight. And finally, there are no supplementals at this point funded, although as indicated, there's no reduction. So, we recognize the need and importance of advocating for the Alexandria Transit Vision Plan implementation, the new Dash network that has been successful. But we also recognize the fiscal constraints that may exist within the city and understand that. So where I'm going to go next is, this is the opportunity for us to have a little discussion and guidance, and certainly I'll allow the Mr. Chair for you to step in here in just a moment as well. What I need coming out of this discussion is guidance from the board relative to priorities moving forward. And that should be in the form of what is the message that the board wants shared with the city manager's office and city council? What kind of advocacy, if so desired, do you want us to be pushing in regards to the ATV? Do you want us to hold the course, say nothing? And does the board want to weigh in? I will note here, I skipped over this paragraph, and I don't want to skip over this, that we do recognize it's a big lift. The current services increased by almost 18%, and that's not including the trolley. So it's a big jump. There's certainly new money coming to Dash. Much of those increases are attributable to wage requirements according to our collective bargaining agreement, certainly our fare free service, the loss of revenue there, and a number of other factors that are contributing. And the trolley goes from having operated from only 9 or 10 months, I think, to a full 12 months. So the trolley goes up as well over the current year. So I will stop at that. Welcome any questions. Mr. Chair, I will happily turn it over to you if you would like to also add to what I've said, and we can have a discussion here about where things are in the budget process.
Thanks, Josh. I just wanted to ask Kendall, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there's anything you want to add from the city perspective before the board has further discussion, I think that would be helpful.
I would love that opportunity, and I will admit there's a weird, I'm a member of the board. I'm also the city's finance director and a former budget analyst, so there's a lot of hats going on right now. But I did want to share some perspective about the reductions, which no matter the economic condition of the city, we are always going to ask for reductions and ask departments and all of the agencies and the schools to look at how they do what they do and historic spending, and are there places, are we still doing things? And I think the facility change is a great example. And so there are program and service reductions, and then are there ways you can do things differently? And so I guess we always want the reduction options to be put forward so they're all considered. As a city, there were $1.3 million of these savings, and Dash had 54,000. Yes, we were all asked to produce 2.5% across the board. So there are a lot of, so every add to the budget isn't always just an add. There are changes and shufflings and slicing and dicing. So that's just some perspective on the reduction side. And then I want us to be careful that we don't sort of net all this together. There are expenditure asks and challenges, and then there's revenue challenges. And we kind of go at our revenue forecasting and assumptions with a good faith effort that this is what we're going to try to do. And so and that's why we do the budget reviews and the analysis throughout the year to say, all right, here's what we hoped was going to happen. Here's what we thought was going to happen. And so we do that evaluation process throughout the year. So then as the year is coming to a close, we can make our budget amendments based on what we thought was going to happen. I don't know if now's the time to ask about this. On the advertising side, at the budget public hearing on Monday night, there were 10 speakers and half of them were interested in climate action, climate change. And Dash is on the forefront of that with the electrification. And is there an opportunity on the advertising side to partner with some of the advocates for environmental initiatives and climate and the EPC to say, advertise here, we are embodying what everyone is trying to do. And maybe that's an approach on the advertising side that you guys might already be exploring it, but something to think about in terms of an advertising avenue that might be a good source for us to take advantage of the initiatives we've got underway and get people to partner and advertise and boost the revenue in the process. So I think that was it. Josh touched on a lot, that the 17.9%, that is a big increase, $3.5 million. But advocating for yourself, especially at the work session that will be on the Livable and Green, is always valuable. That was it.
Thanks, Kendall. Mr. Chair, I would just follow that. I totally agree. I mean, I think, that program is one that we have an opportunity to grow. So I do think that there will be progress in that. And I want to shout out to Kendall and her team and Hillary and her team, and frankly, everyone at the city. They're always very gracious in kind of helping us to figure these things out, and being sort of a more external party. Sometimes we can get a little turned around about how it all plays out. But I think that, in fact, Kendall was very gracious to even take my call late on Friday. I was like, I'm trying to figure some of this out. Help me. But I think setting these goals and like I said, my goal always in these kind of presentations is to make sure that I'm upfront and honest and just transparent. But that certainly isn't an indication that we can't get there from a revenue perspective. And I think thinking outside the box and also kind of evaluating that program since it's just started. This will be a good time for us to kind of look at, like, are there things that we can change to make it more successful? So I think those are conversations we should have.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you, Kendall. We as a board, and Matt has his hand raised, so I'll recognize you in a moment. I mean, we as a board, we look at kind of multiple hats that we wear, and one of them being advocacy for the needs of the system. And this would seem like a year where there's some potential to do that. We have a lot of budget asks that are unfunded, and they kind of go in different boxes, including some potential service improvements. And we look at we have the chart that basically shows the cost per rider for each of the parts of the ATV that weren't yet funded, the Duke Street improvements, which do seem to net a lot of potential additional ridership. And then we have to look also at the not major, but yet potentially significant reductions to Josh's ability to kind of train and develop his staff, offset by some increases. And we had talked a lot in the fall about the need for those additional positions, and it appears that the manager recognized that in his budget. So kind of figuring out what we go forward and what the community expects and what we can ask for. Incredibly, because I think the community wants to see, invested a lot in the ATV and wants to see that ultimately come to fruition. So kind of looking at what's our way forward and how much do we want to look at. Matt.
Thanks, Chair. By the way, Dave, your audio is sort of fading in and out a bit. Josh, I've got a couple questions. First of all, is the decline in the ad revenue based on demand for ads, or are we just not doing the ads correctly? Because it looks like the WMATA buses are just, you know, packed to the gills with big ads. And they always seem to have ads on their buses, whereas our ads are pretty small. And I was just wondering if that's a factor. And I don't know what the answer is. And the second question is there a way to accelerate the extension of the trolley into Carlisle and then, you know, sort of gaining more revenue, such as we already have from the entities along King Street?
Well, I'll go in order of your questions. So your question number one about the program. So a couple of things differentiate or different between our program and WMATA's. One is we are not under the same contractor. So the contractor who's selling WMATA ads is selling them for all of WMATA between Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So their entire service territory, which covers a pretty substantially larger square miles than what we cover. But our contractor sells also to Fairfax, so they cover Fairfax County. I think, you know, truth be told, I think it's that we're a new option. So we're having to break into a market that's pretty well saturated, to your point. WMATA has had this for years. Fairfax probably not as long, but has had it for longer than us. We only, aside from going to the Pentagon, we only transverse the city of Alexandria. So if they're selling an ad, typically the advertisers want to know who are the, you know, what's the service area and what are the people. Now, obviously, we have a lot of people drive through from different parts of the region, but the advertisers are kind of focused in on that. We're a little more restrictive about where the ads are placed. We got some real negative feedback about putting ads on our buses that went onto windows or wraps that went over windows. We had a number of concerned constituents about that. So we prohibited that in our policy. So advertisers can't do the big, huge kind of wrap all over the bus like they do with WMATA. So, but you know, I think the market honestly is just starting to come back. You know, we're now seeing more people moving around. I don't think advertisers were looking to buy any ads during the pandemic, especially not on a bus that was carrying, you know, a fraction of the people that it carried before. And when people were not moving out of their houses, they're investing in online, they're investing in television, they're finding people on their phones. They're not really spending the money on something that's more generalized, publicly facing. I think that will come back. So I do think there's opportunity there. Again, we will work with the vendor to understand and we're open to them having recommendations if there are things about our policy that are prohibitive. We certainly would look to revise that. On your second question about the trolley, the extension of the trolley is a part of the ATV plans. Martin may be able to chime in better on this than me. I don't see Martin on the screen, so he might not be at his computer at the moment, but I will say, oh, there he is. I would ask him if he wants to answer anything related to the trolley extension or the plan for that.
Thanks, Josh. I can comment just briefly. Yeah, we're currently aiming for kind of the FY24 to 25 ballpark for a potential extension of the trolley. And the reason for that is that we do require additional vehicles to operate that extension. With regard to the revenue, I may not have this 100% right, but I believe the hotel tax that funds the trolley is a citywide tax. And I can easily be corrected on that. So it may not be a situation where if we extend the trolley over to the Westin in Carlisle, that they would have to then contribute additional amount. I think they already are, but please, folks from the city, correct me if that's wrong.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Martin. I appreciate that. Josh, just one more thing. Like, how much would an ad cost? And is there a way you could target Alexandria businesses and tell them, hey, you've got the opportunity to do purely local advertising directed at a local market of consumers? You know, I could see, you know, maybe local restaurants or insurance carriers or providers or banks or things like that with a local bent and a focus in a local market, maybe wanting to get in. How much would it cost to run an ad? I mean, what are we talking, thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars?
I honestly wouldn't be able to answer that off the top of my head, but if it's okay with you, I'll mark that as a follow-up item. I don't see Whitney on anymore. She may have dropped off, but Whitney, deals a lot with that program. But I think to your point, we can certainly provide some perspectives on that, and certainly welcome some recommendations as to local advertisers. I do know that one of the reasons for selecting the vendor that we picked is because they are local. The vendor who handles WMATA is a national firm that's based out of another city. They're selling Chicago, New York, LA, Washington, DC, all at once. And they don't really care about local stuff. So that's a differentiator. That was something that was a key component. And at the time when Evan was here, Evan Davis really kind of led that RFP and that process, and I think worked pretty hard to ensure that there was that local component.
Well, and just one more thing, as long as the space is there, and I would hate to see just empty space on a bus. So even if you or Dash put on the back of a bus, tired of sitting in traffic, ride Dash for free. I mean, that's a resource that you have that would maybe get people to get out of their cars onto the bus. And it doesn't cost us anything if we're not using it for any revenue vis-a-vis advertising. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Understood. Yeah, we'll certainly look into that.
Can I check, are we talking only about advertising on the outside of the bus, or is there opportunity inside where we might want to be able to help provide further information? And it could be other city entities and agencies that want to impart information to the people that ride. I'm thinking about DCHS.
Yeah, I was talking about the outside just because the inside, I mean, over the pandemic, there were no riders, so it really wasn't of value to many people. But yeah, I mean, consider either, obviously.
But to your point of if we've got the space and we just want to further a message, then that can be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. We do know that advertisers are not overly enthusiastic about interior ads, largely because they only hit the people who are actually riding. So it's a more limited exposure. We did talk with them about that, but to your point, that's a place where we could certainly talk more with our ridership about the opportunities that exist for Dash. So.
I think hopefully you can hear me now. I think you do that already, and I know internal city agencies have always had the ability to have ads on buses like DCHS initiative. Those have always been there even when we didn't take other advertising.
Yes, that is true. We do run stuff for Dash and for others. And David, I would just a little Zoom thing. If you check your mic settings next to the mute button, the little drop down, and make sure what microphone is selected there on Zoom, you might have to select your headset as your microphone. Not sure if that might be the audio.
Okay, I have internal microphone and then same as system are the only two options that are showing up.
Try same as system, see if that works. No. Try again. Try the other one.
Well, that's what I had before. Is that any better?
Yeah, we'll get through it. We'll get you some. All right, we'll get someone to work on the headset for you next time we see you. We can hear you now.
I was having trouble hearing you guys, I think, because it was feeding through the headset, but I think it's better now. And I apologize if any of this got lost in kind of my early remarks, were just, as we look at our role as advocates, kind of what do we want to present to the city in terms of, where we can have an impact as we're looking at the things that weren't funded. and we know that there's interest in the community and among council for seeing the ATV, reach its full potential. And so, understanding the city has limitations, can't fund all of it, but where can we put our energy in the time that's left before the city adopts the budget to try to make some progress on the ATV? And I would suggest the Duke Street improvements, although I did want clarification, the 5 additional peak buses, is that something that we have available, or are we waiting then to go through capital procurement as well? Or, is the 1.77, does that include the buses? Or is that just the operating cost?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak on that. So the costs presented are just operating costs. There's no capital costs included in the table. We do believe that we have the fleet capacity to take on that. That is the only improvement that would require additional buses. We did have to kind of reconsider some other improvements we might have included because they required additional buses that we didn't think we would be able to provide.
I'm sorry, Mark, I raised my volume because I think when I had the headset, it was lower. Could you repeat that?
Sure, sorry about that. So I was just responding that the costs that are presented on that table are just operating costs. There's no capital fleet costs in there. We believe that we do have the capacity to add those additional peak buses. We had considered some other improvements that also required additional peak buses, but we felt those were not going to be possible, so we did not include those on the table. So that's the only improvement that would require additional peak buses, and we believe we can.
But the buses are there. We have them. Okay, got it. It's just the additional operators that require to run them. Okay, I mean, because when we look at the chart of what when Josh had broken down the improvements in terms of percentage of low income, percentage of minority populations that are served, that one scores very well, and it also is the most productive out of the service enhancements, and also feeds into, as we're beginning to discuss, the creation of BRT in that corridor could be helpful because we're trying to again create more demand for service that's there now and entice people to ride transit to show that that system is going to be very productive as we make improvements in dedicated lanes and other things that will help move service along. I would throw that out just for initial discussion, but would encourage colleagues to share kind of what you feel would be the best use of our energy.
I was working on getting that chart up for you, David. That's why the share stopped.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Oh, Martin's working on it there. You're referring to this chart, correct?
Yes, because this breaks down all of the unfunded service improvements for FY23, and we have some that are less that are lower cost, although the ridership increases are much less. But if you kind of want to go bold, that would probably be the one to focus on. The other area, and maybe Kendall can provide some clarification on this, where we have some losses in terms of money for our own staff training and development. Is that a reduction that is being taken kind of across city departments, or is that a bit unique to Dash?
I mean, we all have cuts like that, and the notion is that either not to say you can't generate money, and you guys are a little unique because the last couple of years you haven't been able to stay under budget for a variety of reasons. So a reduction is sort of just adding to the woes for a variety of reasons. But no, every department across the city has their non-service reductions, just basically what we call efficiency savings, where we think we're going to be able to make this work and it's not, it won't have an impact. But the bottom line is money. If you have to keep doing things exactly the way you did them before, then you're going to have to find money from someplace else. The assumption is that you can live without that money when you put forward an efficiency savings.
Yes, David, I'll add,
thank you.
In TNES, we certainly put forward a lot of efficiencies and took, we take a much higher percentage cut than this and in our department each year. And I believe this is one of the first years that Dash has had to even take a reduction. So I would just throw that out. Most city departments are putting forward more cuts than as a percentage of our budget than this.
Okay, thank you. Josh, do you want to speak more to some of the other pieces of this beyond the service that maybe we know a little less about how that would impact the organization?
Certainly. So, I would say that if I was asked, I'm going to get this slide back up here for you. If I was asked about these relative to where we are now versus where maybe if we were going to exert energy and prioritize going somewhere, I think that, the staffing funding that we got is great, and we'll work with that, and I think that's very much appreciated, and I recognize that's not common. So I don't think pursuing that supplemental or the service reliability supplemental at this point is really worth targeting of energy. I think that where there are external entities, and when I talk about external entities, I'm talking about our riders, I'm talking about elected officials, I'm talking about people in the community or regionally who are talking about the new network and those kinds of things. I think where there is probably an importance to talk about, if we're going to talk about anything new, additional that we need to do, like one of these supplementals, it's going to be those ATV improvements. Again, I think we all went into the ATV knowing that it was a big lift and it wasn't always going to get funded, and I think that's okay. Where I, to Kendall's point, put on different hats, putting on the hat as a rider or as someone who is a user of the system, I would want to see advocacy for enhanced services. I would want to see advocacy for something that was tangible that would affect my life, right? And so that's the most direct impact for our riders is the improvements on the network. And we know that they are substantial for disadvantaged populations, and we know that they are significant in the impact of use of the system and ridership. We've already seen that in the first wave of the new network. So, I'm not sure if this is a question you're asking me, but I'll put it out there. I think that that's where, if there's going to be effort to advocate, I think that would be the place for it that would be appropriate to do it. And I, also put on my hat as a partner to the city and as a peer to, the others on this board and others who have to do work through the city process. I think they've done an incredible amount for us already. And I don't think that I wouldn't go in the room asking for city staff to be advocating for this. I don't think that that's, I think that that's a complicating thing that really is the responsibility of Dash, and Dash leadership and the board, if that is the direction that you all desire to go. And as general manager, I will follow the guidance of the board, and I'm happy to engage in those conversations and to further help provide the information that may be necessary as a part of those discussions. I will mention that the ATV implementation builds year over year, right, Martin? I mean, essentially, there are improvements called for all the way up through the 2030 plan. And that's a lot of lifting too. The last thing I would say is we should be aware as a group that next year, Dash is going to continue to have cost increases for just current services, right? We know that there are year-over-year cost increases regardless. We have we'll have a new contract, a new labor contract that'll need to happen next year. So I think each year we're going to see these lifts for sure. I would first and foremost express appreciation to the team and to everyone at the city who's made what's happened already happen so far. And I would want to see us, if we're going to advocate in a way that is not adverse to them and what they're needing to manage, but is more focused specifically to the responsibilities of Dash and the direct services we provide to our riders.
Thanks, Josh. I'd like to hear from others about where you feel we should be going on budget advocacy.
David, can I just suggest that you don't, as a board, spend any more time on the revenue piece? You made a sound request. OMB decided it should be higher, and you're going to do the best you can for the rest of the year. And if it doesn't come in, it doesn't come in, and we resolve that just like we do when the library fees and fines don't come in or parking tickets aren't issued. That's a holistic look, and that's it. You're going to address it with good faith throughout the year, and it happens where it happens.
I would agree with you on that, Kendall.
I agree as well.
If I could add too, and I know it's a little separate from this discussion, but I did just want to point out a couple of things that kind of happened on the capital side of the budget, and that Dash did get about $6 million from city dollars for bus fleet replacement, which we'll be able to leverage hopefully for some of the grant applications as a local match, and hopefully get a lot more money from those city dollars that we did put into it. And that also this year there was a new project in the CIP, and I think it addresses some of the concerns I've been hearing over the past couple of months about transit access and amenities. There's a new CIP project for $113,000 just this year for bus shelter maintenance. And so we're working on kind of a team for not only some of the things that we had talked about before with transit access and amenities, but also making sure that our bus shelters are maintained and suitable for people. So there's money on the other side coming to Dash as well. And that was a new project that we saw this year. And I think it's going to be great just being able to leverage that money to go after a lot of these grants, and really hopefully it's going to help us kind of move toward electrification a lot sooner than we had originally planned. So just wanted to call out that additional city dollars.
And that's important too. And I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of risk in undertaking an attempt to make a case for some of the ATV improvements, which, we, had promised the community would be forthcoming, and then allowing advocates who want to speak up in favor of those and talk to the city about what priorities are along with us to do so as well. I'm just not seeing a lot of downside in doing that. I understand that we have to understand the overall fiscal picture, but we are here to advocate for the services that are needed to allow people to commute across the city and to get where they need to go. So that's my view on it, but I really would like to hear, and those of you who haven't spoken up yet, if you could maybe share, what you're kind of thinking through, or if you have hesitancy or reluctance to pursue any additional budget advocacy, that's important to hear as well. I mean, I don't want to call on people on the spot, but I mean, we Josh has asked for direction from us, and so I think and it's okay to say, yeah, we're happy with the budget request that we have, and I think that Kendall and Hillary have laid out in the context of the budget some understanding of that. We fared fairly well, but we do have these unmet needs that we had supported in the fall. And, do we want to pursue those or not? And which ones is really the question that we have to answer. So. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think the strategy that Josh had laid out, given the current budget situation and I'll say the realistic projections for what our system would be able to support, given the reconfiguration of the bus routes, I think it's a sound one, and go forward with that. I'm not sure if there's any one in particular that I would be a stronger advocate for, other than what has been shared this evening.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? So I guess what we would do if we decide to go ahead with that would be basically, lobbying the mayor and council and basically discussing with them, you know, what our needs are and what the costs would be, so that they can consider that in the context of other, you know, adds and deletes that they're looking at with the budget. You know, that's what we would do. And you know, we have had years where we've had to speak up more because we haven't had our entire current services funded. Often we get that money back from council because we advocate hard and we have very strong advocates for transit on council. But you know, it seems like it would be helpful to our riders, and especially with so many new council members, to also be educating them about, you know, what the ATV's full potential is, and an awareness of what the costs would be to get there. So do you need, what do you need from us? It doesn't call for a specific motion, Josh, but you've heard a little bit from us. Is this, are we able to go forward at this point?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, you know, look, I also understand this may be something that is navigated on a smaller scale, you know, by you and I, Mr. Chair. But I think what I would be looking for is if I would be concerned if the board was saying, do not, or I would want to know if the board says, you know, do not bring up supplementals related to the ATV any further. I'm not getting that. I'm not seeing that in the discussion. I'm seeing, you know, maybe we're sort of comfortable with where we were on the supplementals. And so maybe I think the strategy here would just be, Mr. Chair, you and I can get together and we can engage in the normal process per the procedures the city has outlined in regards to feedback about the budget. And just make sure it's highlighted. For me, speaking in my role at Dash, I would be concerned if council didn't see anything related to the ATV, especially because I get asked a lot about it. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting a lot of questions about the new network, a lot of interest, a lot of desire to see that continue to be successful. And if that's just the conversation we have, just so that everybody understands what the next steps are, and that's as far as we get, I would feel comfortable with that. If there is a desire for council to, you know, allocate additional funding to make those things happen, then great. You know, I think that is also a response that we would like to see, because we know, and we knew going into the ATV and approving it and council approving it and everyone sort of coming to the table saying that we need to make sure we're putting this on the table all the time. Again, realistically, we know we won't be able to accomplish all of it, but as long as it's on the table and people know what it might take. And I can, you know, following this, I've got feedback and understanding. This is enough for me to move forward with you, Mr. Chair, and city staff to make the next steps through the feedback process.
You and I will connect then and go forward. When is the work session on livable, green and livable?
March 23rd.
Okay.
And I've been asked to present at that, so I will be presenting at that as well.
Okay. Well, then we'll connect after this meeting.
Great. Okay. Then we've already covered the MOU or the interlocal agreement, so that's great. So I will now turn it over to my colleague Edward, who will give us some financial updates and discuss the other number challenge that we have related to the current year. And I see Kendall smiling. Here's an opportunity for us to talk about, but go ahead, Edward.
All right, thank you, Josh. So I will follow your presentation on next year's budget with updates on where we are against this year's budget. Year to date, we are at a deficit of 2.98 million. However, the year end projected deficit is 842,000. One of the reasons that comes down towards the end of the year is the I-395 grants that we've discussed previously. The reimbursements for those are not in our projected numbers, nor are the costs. So as we start to take them, that cuts down toward primarily against the wages to date. So that's why the year-to-date deficit kind of closes towards the end of the year. Those reimbursements have been submitted to NVTC. They're just waiting final approval before we can start to process them. So the September through December and likely September through January numbers will all be, those reimbursements will be processed in the month of March. So those would be reflected in the April meeting. You'd start to see that in the year-to-date number. I'll get into the items that are affecting that year-end projection and what's primarily causing that deficit. Last month, I mentioned overtime being a significant and growing problem. I have now taken the trends that we've seen and trended them out to the future months, which is how we get to that deficit number. Operations overtime alone is projected to finish $1.25 million over budget. We do budget a significant or an amount in overtime, but we're coming in, we've consistently been over in overtime. We're projected to finish the year at 1.25 over budget in overtime. The shortage in operators is the primary contributing factor to that. That's the largest driver of that overtime. We are looking at what we can do to that. We're evaluating potential sign-on bonuses to attract new operators, potential advertising, but we are looking at cost neutral methods before going down that route, just because of where we find ourselves in the budget. We are doing things internally to see what we can do until we have those operators. The Dash planning staff is looking at modifying work assignments as part of a larger effort to mitigate those, such as adding more built-in overtime to full-time rosters to better control how the overtime hours are distributed across the workforce, and offering more runs through extra work bidding to allow operators with less seniority a better chance to secure overtime work. But it should be noted that those efforts will really have a minimal impact on the end number. The best thing we can do is get operators in. And even if we did get operators in the door now, they're not going to start until later in the year, and it's really not going to, have an impact on that year-end number. Some of the another thing that should be noted as far as what is an issue with overtime is we are contractually obligated through the collective bargaining agreement to allow drivers with the most seniority to have preference on overtime. And so, as you can imagine, the operators who cost the most get preference to that overtime. So that is a large factor in why those costs have been so high. We already mentioned some of the things impacting advertising revenue. We had that in the year end, where we had that budgeted for 180K for FY22. I've taken that down to 100K, which is our contractual minimum. We have only seen around 20K through February, and you'll see 11K in the January numbers. We only get those through the vendors' quarters. So we got that once in November. We'll get that again in February. We've discussed some of the reasons that's been slow to materialize. I did speak with our vendor. It's just advertisers have been slow to have interest. Some of that's due to the pandemic. Some of that also has to do with the types of ads. We mentioned kind of those bus wraps. The vendor did say that's something that a lot of advertisers have interest in that we don't do because of the concerns we've heard from residents. So those are some of the contributing factors to why advertising revenue has not materialized. And then I'll get into fuel costs. The 842K number does reflect the year-to-date overages we've seen in fuel. We have seen fuel costs more year-to-date than it was budgeted. What that number does not account for is the recent developments that are impacting fuel costs. As anyone who's been listening to the news or watching, that's obviously a large concern, and it is definitely going to amplify the issue we've seen year-to-date. We're already seeing those increases this month already. So we are currently looking at how to reforecast that year-end number to really take into account the recent developments and how that impacts those fuel costs. As far as what we can do about that year-end deficit projected number, we are working with city staff. We will likely need to request additional budget authority and most likely a supplemental appropriation in the June meeting with city council. So that is where we find ourselves year to date. If you could go to the next slide, it just breaks down some of those kind of line by line. One of the things I do want to draw your attention to is in the expenditures, I pulled out operations overtime just so you could see that as its own separate line, so you can see just how big an impact that is having. It is in our budget at just over $1 million, and it's projected to end at about 2.3 million. So you can see operations overtime is the single largest item driving that deficit. So those are my updates on where we are year to date and where we are projected to end the year. And with that, I will open it up to any questions. Hearing none, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Edward. Just getting back to my agenda because I was in the board packet. All right,
Sure.
Martin has some planning reports for us.
Yeah. Martin, I'll give you control here. It may take a moment.
Sure. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening again. So there are 4 planning related items in tonight's agenda. There are 2 for which board action is requested. Those are items 6B and 6C. Before I get to that, we'll start with item 6A, which is a brief ridership update. This graph is presented on page 19 of your packet, but it shows our month-to-month ridership for the last few years. Green line shows the current fiscal year. You can see that we did have some gains, some significant gains in the first 3 or 4 months of the new network when free fares. We got almost up to pre-COVID levels, shown in the blue and yellow or blue and orange lines. However, in January, we did have an expected reversal of that due to the Omicron surge and the fact that we were operating at a Saturday reduced Saturday level for pretty much the entire month of January. We're still operating about 70% of pre-COVID, which is better than we were doing in this last summer before the network, which was 45% pre-COVID. So we're still well above what we were before the network, but we did see a reduction, which was expected. So just flagging that there. Any questions on item 6A before I move to 6B? Hearing none, I will keep going. So item 6B is a board action item. We are requesting board approval of the 2 Title VI policies that are shown here, the Title VI Service Standards and Policies and the Title VI Service Equity Analysis Policy. Both of these policies were presented to the board at last month's meeting. Staff has conducted a 1-month outreach period. There is a memo in your board packet on pages 20 through 22 that summarizes the extent of our outreach activities and some of the feedback that we received. We have made some revisions to the policies based on the feedback that we heard from the board and the community. And that feedback is also summarized in the memo. And the full policies, final policies are included as attachment 3 in your memo, which starts around page 65 of your PDF packet. Happy to take any discussion or questions that the group may have.
Martin, I think you all did an excellent job of preparing this and appreciate the meetings that you had in the community and responding to the suggestions about translator service and having that available. This will require a motion, so if there are no questions from board members, I'll ask if someone wants to move adoption.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Martin, I apologize, but I don't recall, but there were some questions related to this in our February meeting. Did you address those specifically?
Yes, yeah, there were a couple comments. There were a couple comments from board members. I think you had a comment about adding a clause about appearance and making sure that we're not discriminating.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah.
So we did add a little bit of language to the policy that covered that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Martin.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, if there are no more questions, I'll move to adopt this policy.
All right, moved by Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
second by Ajayesha. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Item 6C is a request that the board provide a board resolution in support of our FY 28-29 Smart Scale grant application. This is Smart Scale is a program that we've benefited from greatly in the past. It's operated by VDOT and the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transit. For this application, we are seeking up to $12 million in funding, which would be used for additional facility electrification improvements. We currently have funding for the first phase of our facility expansion and electrification, which will get us basically 20 charging stations on the gravel impound lot, which is located just adjacent to our existing facility. So we'll have 20 charging stations, which will be out in the open, out in the weather. They will have overhead pantograph chargers, but they will be exposed to the elements. So what this grant would do is it would add an additional 20 charging stations to bring us up to 40 charging stations over there, and it would provide walls, enclosures to allow to make the facility expansion climate controlled, which will be be very important for the battery electric buses, which often perform better when they're able to be preconditioned during cold weather and they're protected from the elements. The battery doesn't degrade quite as fast. So that will be very important. This grant will provide for that. It will also provide some technology improvements related to some smart charging systems, charge management, and even potentially some energy storage systems that we could potentially store some energy on site. So we're very ambitious with this grant, and that's kind of what it covers. There's a full memo on page 23, a resolution on page 24 for the board to consider.
Questions for Martin about the grant application? Just one question, and I know we've been through this in the past, and so Hillary outlined in her report the city's requests, which seem to be fairly large and really good grants and important projects. But when they do smart scale, do they kind of look at, is there something about sort of a particular amount of an ask from a jurisdiction, or are they rating all of the projects separately and just on their own merit?
Well, they do have limits on the number of projects you can submit from each jurisdiction. So that's part of the way that they control or they distribute it. But yeah, there is a comprehensive scoring system that they kind of assess each project on a series of metrics that they provide to you beforehand. Hillary, you might be able to provide additional background in terms of how they make sure that it's distributed fairly between jurisdictions.
Yeah, I mean, they really try and base it on scoring, but when they get to public hearing, if one jurisdiction has a lot of funding and others have none, that is certainly brought to the attention of the Commonwealth Transportation Board at that time. But I think ultimately they were originally kind of basing it on project scoring, and I think I laid out in my notes the smart scoring that they're looking for each of the projects.
Okay. Does this count as an Alexandria ask, because even though it's a separate entity requesting it?
No. Dash and Alexandria can both submit up to 4 applications. I think 5 pre-applications and 4 applications total.
Okay,
at the end.
thanks. Any questions for Martin? If not, we'll need a motion to submit the grant, submit the smart scale application.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adopt the 2028-2029 Smart Scale Grant as presented by staff.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ajayesha. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, passes unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. And for the final item, item 6D is a bigger item. There's no board action required for this item. This is the presentation of the draft FY23 ATC Transit Development Plan, the TDP as we call it. No board action required tonight. There will be board action requested in probably May. So we'll be looking ahead to that. The TDP, for those that have not been around in previous years, is an annual service planning and fare planning document that we use. It's closely tied to our budget process. It really sets out a roadmap for the following fiscal year and then the 5 subsequent fiscal years after it. Really encourage board members in the community to get involved in this process. This is the best and most important way that the board and the public can shape DASH service planning efforts and the things that we're trying to do in terms of our service improvements. So really an important process that we go through each year. I have shown on the screen kind of a summary of all the different things that are in the document. It's a large document, probably about 60 pages. If you have a chance to look through it, it's available in the packet. It's also available at the website dashbus.com/TDP. So definitely feel free to take a look at that to get a flavor for what's going on at DASH. As I mentioned, it covers a 6-year period. However, it's really the first year, FY23, that's the most important, since that's the near term that's tied to our budget requests. And that's really what we're going to be rolling out in the following fiscal year, which starts on July 1st. So that will be kind of the focus for my presentation this evening. So the FY23 service plan summary, the overall goals we're trying to accomplish with this the most important thing with FY23 is that we've got a new Metro Rail station opening at Potomac Yard. So we want to make sure that we have really good bus service to that Metro Rail station. Secondly, we also have, obviously, as we've discussed earlier, some major things that we want to do to help build out the rest of the 2022 ATV network. So that's a high priority. And then we're also trying to make bus stop improvements as well. We've identified our network, we've got our structure, we know which streets our buses are going to be running on now. So now we're looking to really improve the bus stops, making sure they're accessible, providing additional amenities where we can, and also making sure that we have a balance between our stop spacing, making sure that we have the correct balance of stop spacing, so that we may need to consolidate some bus stops, but make sure that the ones that we do maintain are very accessible and have good. As I mentioned previously, the TDP is a service and fare document. Certainly the fares are less complicated now. So I've just noted here that we are anticipating that free fares would continue through FY23 and through FY25 per the terms of our TRIP award. So for FY23, we've provided 2 different scenarios, which have been discussed a little bit in the budget section with Josh. The first is our baseline scenario, and that is directly tied to the preliminary budget that we received from City Manager. There are no increases to overall service levels. We're just assuming that the buses and routes and service levels that we're running today are the ones that will be running in FY23. There are some service changes, though, as I mentioned, for Potomac Yard Metro. Those are cost neutral changes, just changing the routing at Potomac Yard. So it's really a baseline cost neutral scenario. The second scenario includes a lot of the unfunded ATV improvements that we've talked about previously. It includes all the Potomac Metro service changes, but then also on top of that includes this $2.6 million in additional operating costs for improving connectivity between the West End and Old Town, and then also some weekend and off-peak service improvements. So I'll get into those a little bit more. So first, for the baseline scenario, as I've mentioned, Potomac Yard is the big change that we're grappling with. Obviously, everyone knows it's the infill station that will be served by the blue and yellow line halfway between the Braddock Road and National Airport stops. You can see a picture here, just to give you a little bit of additional context for the buses. The platform obviously will be here. There's going to be a walkway across the tracks, and the temporary bus stop, when the station opens, will be located on Potomac Avenue, right next to the Target here. So we'll have our buses servicing that area. Long-term, when this is built up and developed, there'll be a dedicated transit center in this area, so it'll be a little bit closer. But for the meantime, until that happens, we'll be stopping on the street here to have some bus shelters and facilities there. And this is Potomac Avenue, for reference. This is Potomac Avenue northbound, and then Glebe is right here, and obviously Target. So this map shows routes that we'll be serving, the DASH routes that will be serving Potomac Yard when it opens. And again, I think Hillary talked about it, but we're assuming it'll be late fall when the station opens. That's kind of the latest information that we've gotten from WMATA. So that's what we're assuming. The DASH routes, there are 2 DASH routes that currently serve Potomac Yard Metro. One is line 33, which is shown in teal. It comes from King Street Metro up through Del Rey, and then turns right in Alexandria, and then comes into the Potomac Yard Shopping Center. It currently comes into Target this way. With Potomac Yard Metro, it would be rerouted around to the metro station, and then it would end at the shopping center so that we're still serving the shopping center. Similarly, the 36A and B come from Fairlington and Shirlington. It's one of our frequent all-day routes that comes just down Glebe. And instead of ducking, likewise, instead of ducking into the Target, it would continue around to service the metro station and then end at the shopping center. The biggest change is line 34, which was a new route we introduced in Old Town. Currently, it would not be shown on this map. It ends at Braddock Road, but with the opening of the metro, we would be rerouting it. It would no longer serve Braddock Road Metro. It would instead be realigned, come up Richmond Highway using the Metroway dedicated lanes, and then would be rerouted onto Glebe and then serve the station that way. So that would be the first time that a Dash bus would be able to use the Metroway dedicated lane. So we're excited about that. And just this is the rest of line, or most of the rest of line 34. You can see the dotted line shows the current 34 alignment. It starts at Lee Center, comes up past City Hall, travels on Fairfax Street, and then comes up Slater's Lane and then back down to Braddock Road. As I mentioned, instead of going to Braddock Road, it would be rerouted up Richmond Highway to the new metro station. We're also proposing a change. Instead of running on North Fairfax Street, it will be moved 2 streets over to North Pitt Street. North Pitt Street has some new development, and it's kind of a part of the Old Town that's not really well served by transit. We've got Washington Street covered by Metro. We've got Fairfax Street has the Old Town circulator, so we have a lot of Dash bus service on this route or on this street. So 34 is a little bit redundant on Fairfax, so we're trying to provide a little additional coverage that we hope will be well received by Old Town. So that's the change on the 34. And
can I ask you a question before you move on the
Sure.
34? I think the routing change to Pitt Street is a good idea and agree with providing more coverage. Have we planned out where the stops will be on that street, and will they all be fully accessible?
Yeah, so we've done several test runs, and we've identified some of the ideal locations. There will be some improvements required, so we're going to have to coordinate with the city on those. There are a couple new developments that come in that have bus stops planned, so some of them will be paid for, but there is some work to be done ensuring that the stops will be improved prior to the start of service. And so my next slide is going to the second scenario, which is the unfunded improvements. So are there any other questions on the Potomac Yard related improvements? Okay. So the second scenario that we've provided here is this unfunded ATV improvement scenario that essentially gets us up to the 2022 ATV plan that was adopted by the board back in 2019. There are 2 kind of buckets that we're showing here. One is the improved connectivity from the west side of town into Old Town, and that's the 30 and 31 improvements that will improve service along Duke Street and King Street into Old Town. And then the second bucket is these weekend frequency improvements. The idea on these is that we still have several routes that operate 7 days a week, but run every hour on Sundays. Some actually run one runs every hour on Saturdays and weekday middays. So we're really trying to elevate all those up to a kind of a minimum threshold of running every 30 minutes all day, 7 days a week. We've kind of been focused a lot on the frequent network. These routes have not been brought up to where we would like them to be, which is every 30 minutes, because 60 minutes is kind of a difficult, not as useful a service as 30 would be. So this map just tries to show visually, geographically where these improvements would occur. The connectivity improvements are shown in red. So you've got line 31 King Street into Old Town, line 30 on Duke Street into Old Town as well. And then the weekend and off-peak improvements are shown in blue. So those are kind of distributed around the city as well. Obviously the missing gaps are the West End, which is line 35, and then line 36 going across town. Those are both funded by the 395 commuter choice, and they have there are 2 most frequent routes. So they're less in need of improvement. I would also note that these crosstown routes, although they don't serve areas like Beauregard, many of the passengers that are coming from the West End into Old Town have to use these routes. So improving the frequency on the 30 and the 31 would be a huge benefit to a lot of folks in Old Town that are having to have multiple transfers that we've heard from. So just digging a little bit further on these line 30 improvements specifically, currently, when we launched the new network, we had to kind of make some sacrifices, and one of those sacrifices that on the 30 and 31, we had to we couldn't have every trip continue past King Street Metro into Old Town with the Old Town circulator. So half the trips during the peak on the 30 stop at King Street and then turn around and go back to the west end. So with these improvements, we would allow to have all the peak trips continue into Old Town, which means that you have less people having to get off at King Street Metro and transfer to another route. Because we've heard a lot of folks from people that are traveling from the west end to Old Town having to make 2 transfers because of this. So this would help address their concerns and make their trip a lot faster and more convenient. And then the Old Town, the other side, down in South Van Dorn Street, currently the line 30 has short trips on the weekends. So it runs every 30 minutes up to Landmark Mall, but then every other trip turns around and goes back to Old Town. So you've got a segment of South Van Dorn and Whiting Street that only has service hourly on weekends. So this would allow all trips to extend out to Van Dorn on weekends. So you have 30-minute service on that corridor. This is sort of similar, but the 31 is the other key east-west route. During off-peak periods, every other trip turns back at King Street Metro. So it's 15-minute service on the trunk, but then only 30-minute service into Old Town. So we're proposing that during off-peaks, all trips would be able to continue into Old Town to Braddock Road to provide that additional connectivity and reduce the number of transfers to make things more convenient for people that are traveling from West Alexandria into Old Town. Okay, the next couple are just basic weekend improvements. For this one, we would be increasing line 33, which serves Del Rey and the New Potomac Yard Metro. We'd be increasing that from every hour on Sunday to every 30. So it would benefit parts of Del Rey, parts of Alexandria, provide good 7-day service to the new metro station. Similarly, for line 34, it runs every hour on Sundays. So again, we'd want to bring that up to every 30 minutes, and that'd be very important for connecting to the new metro rail station. And then the last one here is line 32, which operates from King Street out to Landmark via Eisenhower Avenue. This route runs every 60 minutes during weekday middays, and then also on Saturdays and Sundays. So we would be proposing to bring the route up to every 30 minutes during all those periods. And I think this is especially important given all the development in the Eisenhower East area, the Carlisle area. We really haven't done a great job of getting our foot in the door there with all the development. So I think this is a good first step towards that. And this is the table you've already seen in the packet that kind of breaks out the different improvements by cost. So I will just skip over that for now. Last couple of slides here. This just summarizes some of the subsequent years. We want to continue the implementation of the 2022 and 2030 ATV plan. If there are improvements that we've proposed for FY23 that we're not able to implement, of course, we'd want to pursue those in FY24. So those would be included here. But we do have additional improvements lined up down the road for Duke Street and other corridors to help continue to realize the ATV. We've already talked about the trolley extension by 2025, and then West End Transitway and Duke Street BRT are also on our radar. We're working closely with the city on those, developing operating plans to determine when those might be able to open. And no fare changes proposed. I've just got a slide here for our CIP program, which is explored in more detail in the section 6 of the TDP, but you can see we've got 5 projects: fleet replacement, expansion, facility. We've got some on-route bus charging, a new project for that, our Dash technology project, and then we've got some major grants that we're going to be going after in the next couple of months. So just in terms of process, we are in March, so we are proposing the TDP. We're bringing the draft to the board. Next month, in April, we will be having a public hearing on the TDP and budget, and then we'll be coming back to the board in May for consideration of final adoption and approval. In terms of outreach, we've got a few meetings that are coming up later this month. They'll both be held virtually, so we're going to do that. And then we've got our public hearing in April. We've also got a whole host of activities and events we've got planned for onboard engagement in terms of pop-up events, making sure we have audio announcements on the buses, posters and flyers at bus stops. We want to make sure that, especially for places like line 34, where we're proposing to change the routing, we want to make sure we have flyers at those stops. So we'll make sure to do that. And then, of course, the website is obviously a great place to go, dashbus.com/TDP. So with that, I will wrap up and see if there are any questions or discussion.
Questions for Martin? Martin, I guess I'll just ask one. In looking at the map of the, just trying to understand where the buses will stop once we've realigned to the Potomac Yard Metro Station. So I'm right now the buses go into the mall and actually stop at a couple of the stores along the way. So I'm just trying to understand until the how far away is the on-street stop going to be until the metro station opens from the mall itself?
So you're asking for people that are coming to and from the shopping center?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so currently, I'll admit, it's kind of a challenging operating environment. This is really the one place where we operate in a parking lot, which makes it a little bit challenging. But currently, and I wish I could zoom in on this a little bit more, but you can see that this is Glebe, and then Potomac Avenue is right here, and Richmond's right here. Target is right where my cursor is right now. So currently, most of the buses come in on Glebe and then enter the shopping center this way. So they're going right in front of Target, in front of where everybody enters the store. So then they come up here and then, they normally would go all the way up to the end of the shopping center however, there's some construction up here. There's an Amazon Fresh that's being constructed. So we have a reroute where they're just turning on Reed here and then going back out this way. So with the proposed alignment here, we determined that we wanted to, it's a really difficult thing. We wanted to serve the metro station first. We didn't want people to have if you have commuters who are trying to get to the metro rail, you didn't want to drag them through the parking lot when they're trying to catch a train. So we felt that it was really important to serve the metro station first. We also wanted to be able to stop on the side of the station if possible, so they wouldn't have to cross Potomac Avenue unnecessarily. So we had them come in this way, and then we had a lot of different options for how it would work in terms of going out. We're still working with the shopping center to kind of figure out what the best option would be and where we can get bus stops. But I think for now, we're just showing that they would, we would turn around and then proceed back out this way. So what would happen is there'd be a stop right here in the archway. I don't know if you're familiar, there's kind of an archway right there. So there would be a little bit of walk for folks going, somewhere to PetSmart or somewhere in here. But you'd be close to, all the stores here and all the stores here. The Target folks, there's stops right in this area too, so they could get off here and just walk there. We're still talking with shopping centers to see if there's better options, but right now I think if we were trying to serve in front of the Target, we'd have to do kind of a double loop thing that would be really confusing and not really time efficient. So I think this is what we're kind of showing right now.
And are you going to? What I sounded like you're going to implement this as part of the fiscal year. You would actually, before the metro station has opened, you would be stopping then on the street, where the stop would be. Would it make sense to just continue to serve the shopping center until the station opens? Hopefully will only be 2-3 months, but
yes. So we are not going to make any changes until the metro station opens.
Okay,
so
got it. I wasn't entirely clear on that. Okay, that makes sense.
It might not quite line up perfectly because we'll have to kind of be at WMATA's beck and call in terms of the actual opening date, but we'll try and line it up as best we can.
Okay. I just want people to be stopped on the street where they're in front of a construction fence when they're trying to get into the mall. Once the metro station opens, I think your point about getting people to the station first because they're lining up to catch a train. That's very important. That's going to be a huge generator of trips. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the shopping center can offer us anything. But and those stops aren't great just in terms of amenities either, because they're not things that the city then is able to build shelters there. It's it's not hopefully we're going to have much higher quality shelters and things like that at the station along Potomac Avenue. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for the update, and we look forward to hearing the results of the community meetings next month.
Thank you very much.
All right, we do need to have a brief executive session. We're going to discuss some litigation matters and a personnel matter. We're going to need a motion. The text is on the screen. If somebody could go ahead and read that.
Sure, Mr. Chair. I, Matt Harris, hereby move that the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing legal and personal matters pursuant to section 2.2-3711 A1 of the Code of Virginia.
Moved by Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Steve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. So we will give staff a moment to transition to the executive session. Oh, I should announce before we enter executive session, our next public meeting will be April 13th, 2022, 5:30 p.m. That meeting will likely be virtual.